My name is Jonah Merrick, and I knew something was off the moment my keycard didn't unlock the back door. It was 7:03 a.m. on a Monday in early October. Anchorage cold, just enough frost to bite through your jacket if you paused too long in the wind. I'd been coming in through that same damn door for 8 years. Always early. Always dependable. I figured it was a glitch. The office was still dark when I stepped in through the front. Security gave me a strange look, like he was trying to figure out whether to say, "Good morning," or, "You okay?" The silence in the hallways felt intentional, like the kind of quiet right before a room full of people yells, "Surprise." Only this time, it wasn't that kind of party. Upstairs, someone had moved my desk. Not cleared it, moved it. Files gone, chair replaced, nameplate missing. In its place, a different name I didn't recognize. Emmons. New guy. No warning. I checked my email. Nothing. No updates. No memos. No scheduled meetings. Just a vague calendar entry from Friday titled Executive Review Mandatory. Hosted by Joseph Callan, our VP of Development. Now that was strange. Callan and I hadn't spoken directly in almost 6 months. He was one of those future of the company types, polished, Stanford MBA, always looked like he had just stepped out of a tech startup commercial. I didn't have much in common with guys like that. I was boots on the ground. Field first. When I started at Polaris Minerals back in 2015, we were running 20 trucks out of 2 quarries. Today we had over 80 across 3 states. I'd overseen every expansion, built vendor relationships from scratch, knew the logistics chain like the back of my hand. I didn't come from business school, I came from the military. Spent 6 years running supply in Kandahar before I ever heard the term vertical integration. And now, after everything I'd helped build, my access card didn't work, and my desk had a stranger's name on it. I knocked on Callan's door at 8:15 sharp. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Jonah," he said, all casual, like this wasn't the weirdest morning of my professional life. "Let's sit down." I didn't sit. Something wrong with my keycard? He gave me a tight smile. "We've been reviewing some structural realignment options across logistics." That's not an answer. That's a corporate way of saying get ready to bend over. "I wasn't informed," I said. "Did you check your email?" "Checked it twice." He tilted his head and did that thing where people pretend to be thoughtful while knowing exactly what they're about to say. "Effective immediately, your position is being dissolved. As of this morning, Daniel Emmons will be stepping in as Director of Supply Chain Operations. He'll be reporting directly to me." Just like that. No ceremony. No warning. No recognition. "I built that department from the ground up," I said. My voice didn't shake, but something in my chest did. "Everything Emmons is walking into? That's mine. The vendor network, the routing software, the contract with Crown Hauling. Which we're renegotiating," he said, cutting me off. "The board believes we need someone with a more scalable vision moving forward." I wasn't being let go for underperformance. I was being replaced. By someone newer. Cheaper. Flashier. "Jonah," he added, "this isn't personal. It's just the next phase for the company." I finally sat down. Because the weight of betrayal hits harder when it comes from someone who's never even looked you in the eye long enough to see what it cost you to build the thing they're now dismantling. "I assume there's a severance package," I said. Callan nodded. "You'll get the paperwork by noon." That night, I sat in my truck outside my house for nearly an hour, just watching the front porch light flicker. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Not yet. Not until I could figure out how to explain to my wife why the company I'd helped build had just erased me like a typo. I stared at my hands, rough, scarred, calloused. Not the hands of a strategist. Not the hands of a man who fits neatly into someone else's vision board. The last thing I remember thinking before I finally went inside was, they just made a very expensive mistake. The next morning, I was up by 5:30, not out of routine, but out of rage. I didn't sleep. I lay awake playing back the conversation with Callan, every syllable, every corporate dodge and smirk. My body was still, but my mind was on fire. The kind of fire that doesn't scream. It simmers. low and dangerous. I opened my garage, made coffee too strong for human consumption, and sat at my old workbench with a legal pad. Just me, a pen, and 10 years of hard-earned memory. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 words in all caps. The burn list. Not a list of enemies. That's petty. No, this was a list of assets. Clients, vendors, drivers, dispatchers, partners, people who didn't work for Polaris Minerals. They worked with me. And they damn well knew the difference. Names started flowing out of my head like water from a busted pipe. Aaron McKinney, Crown Hauling. We'd been through 2 fuel crises together. His drivers got priority lanes because I handled his bids personally. Louisa Tran, Ridgetop Aggregates. Called me after her father's stroke to help keep the yard afloat. Connor DeWitt, Freight Dispatcher in Spokane. Army. Used to joke we both had sand in our boots and rocks in our heads. 23 names in 15 minutes. I drew a line down the page and started writing details next to each one. What mattered to them? What we'd solve together? What favors were owed, and which ones I still hadn't called in? At 7:15, I called Aaron. Jonah? His voice perked up like it was a normal Tuesday. Yeah. I'm not at Polaris anymore. You get poached. Not quite. Replaced. Silence on the other end. Then a low whistle. By who? New guy. Daniel Emmons. That smooth bastard with the Rolex? That's the one. He exhaled. So what's next? I leaned forward. I'm putting together something new. You in? He didn't hesitate. You let me know where and when. 2 down. 21 to go. By noon, I had coffee with Louisa Tran at a diner off Muldoon Road. She didn't ask for the story. Just slid a mug across the table and said, "Tell me what you need." By 3 p.m., I had 7 vendors already talking about pulling their contracts. The second mine was registered with the state. Not a bad first day for a man with no office, no logo, and no website. But the cracks were already showing. At 4:17 p.m., I got my first email from Polaris's legal team. Subject: Notice of confidentiality obligations and potential breach. It was dressed up in lawyer speak, but the message was clear. We know what you're doing. And we're not going to make it easy. I didn't care. Polaris had made one critical mistake. They thought I was a logistics guy. I wasn't. I was a relationship guy. And now I was coming back with everything they couldn't fire: trust. By Thursday, I had 16 calls logged, 8 meetings scheduled, and 5 handshake deals in motion. I should have felt invincible. But something was itching at the back of my neck. At 9:04 a.m., I got a text from Connor DeWitt. Jonah, you might want to check with your old accounts. Polaris is making calls. Saying some real shady stuff. I called him immediately. Talk. He didn't waste time. One of my guys in Portland told me Emmons called yesterday, told Crown Hauling you were being investigated for misuse of proprietary data. What data? They didn't say. Just enough to make folks nervous. I stared at the wall of my garage, where my whiteboard still had Polaris's old territory map pinned up with blue tape. There were little red dots where I'd closed regional partnerships. It looked like a battlefield. They're trying to poison the well, I said. Connor exhaled. Worse. They're laying the legal foundation. You signed a trapdoor clause, didn't you? I signed what now? It's buried in the revised employment contract Polaris started pushing after 2020, disguised as a digital confidentiality update. I opened my old email archives. Search. Contract update, policy revision, HR memo. Found it. Subject: COVID compliance and data access refresh, required acknowledgement. I remember clicking agree without reading it. Everyone did. Clause 7B, Connor said. They call it a trapdoor. Gives them the right to retroactively define proprietary data. If you leave the company and contact a client within 12 months, they can argue that you used strategic intel in violation of Clause 7B. That's insane. Yeah, but it holds up. The wording's ambiguous enough to keep you tied up in court for a year. Maybe longer. I was silent. Not because I didn't believe him, but because it all made sense now. The sudden replacement. The lack of warning. The way Emmons had stepped in like he'd rehearsed it. They'd been planning this. They wanted me out before Q4. Before I closed the expansion contract with Horizon Mining. Before the year-end bonuses locked in. Before I got too big to sideline. And now they were using the paperwork I signed during a pandemic to legally shut me down. At 1:17 p.m., my wife found me in the living room, staring at a folder I hadn't opened in years, my father's will. I don't know why I had it out. Maybe I just needed to be reminded of where I came from. My dad was a longshoreman in Tacoma. Didn't finish high school. Didn't own a single stock. But he never missed work. Never missed a promise. He used to say, if they can't beat you honest, they'll try to beat you legal. And damn if that wasn't exactly what was happening. That evening, I got an email from Polaris's general counsel. Should you continue to solicit existing clients under the impression that your prior relationships entitle you to circumvent contractual obligations, we will be forced to pursue injunctive relief. Translation, back off or we'll sue. They wanted a fight I couldn't afford. So I didn't fight them. I started looking for someone who could. I met Avery Lang outside a food truck in Midtown at 11:30 on a Friday, in the kind of cold that makes coffee taste like armor. She stepped out of a forest green Defender in jeans, a black peacoat, and boots she looked like she could kill someone in. Avery wasn't your standard attorney. No crisp pantsuits. No laminated portfolios. She wore her hair tied back like she was going into battle. And maybe she was. They called her the Fox in Anchorage legal circles, sharp, elusive, and deadly if cornered. Jonah Merrick, she said, offering a hand like she meant it. I've read your employment agreement twice. Let's talk about how we tear it apart. We sat at a picnic table next to a couple of college kids eating burritos. Avery pulled a thin file from her leather bag and laid it out like a poker hand. Clause 7B is real, she said, flipping to the second page. But it's full of holes. Specifically, it lacks specificity. That's supposed to mean something? I asked. She grinned. It means we're going to make Polaris prove, in court, that every handshake, every call, every vendor, every route, was a proprietary method, and not just you doing your job well. And they'll never be able to do that? Not without inventing documentation. And if they try, we subpoena their systems. I leaned back. I liked her already. What's your angle, Lang? No angle, she said. I hate corporate takedowns. Always the same script. Kick out the old guard, gaslight them, steal their work, threaten them with money they don't have. You're not the first. But you're one of the few who kept the receipts. I didn't save much, I said. But you have relationships. Real ones. That's better than a paper trail. Here's what we do. She outlined a three-pronged strategy. 1. File a preemptive declaration in state court, not a lawsuit, just a legal filing stating your intent to launch a logistics venture with clear client boundaries and non-proprietary assets. That way, Polaris can't argue you acted covertly. 2. Draft a counternotice to every vendor and client you contacted, establishing that no contracts were signed and no confidential data was shared. That puts Polaris on the defensive. 3. Expose the trapdoor clause in the court of public opinion, not through media, but by whisper networks. Vendors talk. Dispatchers gossip. Polaris wants this quiet. We make it noisy. But it won't stop them from trying to sue, I said. No, she said. But it'll change the cost-benefit math. That weekend, I stayed up late typing out the first draft of a client letter, with Avery's edits bleeding in red. I've always believed in building business on trust, not fear. If Polaris chooses to pursue legal action, that's their right. But I won't stop working with people who chose me for how I treat them, not just where I worked. If that puts me at risk, so be it. By Monday, 4 clients had responded to the message with variations of the same thing. Let us know when and where, Jonah. We're with you. But that same morning, I got a call from an old friend inside Polaris. He wouldn't give his name. But I recognized his voice. They've got a plan to bury you, he said. East Coast firm, big firm. They're bringing in a crisis strategist, hired last week. They're scared, I said. No, he replied quietly. They're angry. Let them be. Because now I had a fox on my side. And I wasn't planning to fight fair either. On Wednesday morning, I got served. Not a metaphor. A guy in a gray hoodie knocked on my front door, asked if I was Jonah Merrick, and handed me a manila envelope without saying a word. Inside, summons and complaint. Polaris Minerals vs. Merrick. Case #22, CV 4176. They weren't bluffing anymore. For causes of action. Misappropriation of proprietary methods. Interference with economic advantage. Breach of implied contract. Defamation. Defamation. That one almost made me laugh. I hadn't said a single public word about Polaris. But they knew how this worked. If you can't win the narrative, drag it into the mud. At 10:14 a.m., I called Avery Lang. "I've been served," I said. "I know," she replied. "Check the docket. They filed it last night after hours." Classic move. I did. She was right. The complaint was already making the rounds in industry forums. Carefully timed leaks. Strategic chatter. A headline on a second-rate logistics blog read, "Polaris sues ex-executive for attempted client theft amid internal upheaval." Internal upheaval. That was rich. They fired me, buried the body, and now they were acting like I crawled back up to burn the house down. At noon, a Polaris VP called 3 of my warmest leads and made it clear. "If you continue conversations with Mr. Merrick, we will consider it a violation of your active contract." By 3 p.m., 2 clients had hit pause. One asked for their name to be removed from all documents. Another sent a carefully worded, "We'll circle back next quarter." I wasn't surprised. Scared money always folds first. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a half-empty glass of rye and a stack of vendor notes that no longer felt like momentum. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear the fridge hum. I could hear my wife on the phone upstairs telling someone we'd be fine. Not great. Not okay. Just fine. I hated that word. But the next morning, something changed. At 7:22 a.m., I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "They're lying to everyone. Time to fight dirty. Call me. D." I stared at the screen. It had to be Danielle Pruitt, a former Polaris project lead who'd quit 3 months before I got axed. Brilliant mind. No tolerance for bullshit. Last I heard, she was consulting in Seattle. I called. "They gave Emmons my old data set," she said, without preamble. "Routes, pricing history, vendor records. Even flagged your accounts as high-risk targets weeks before you were fired. You have proof. Better. I have backups. Including the risk report they sent to the board 2 days before your termination." My pulse spiked. "Why are you helping me?" "Because when they fired you," she said, "they sent a message to everyone who ever gave a damn. That loyalty doesn't matter. That being good at your job makes you a threat." I stayed silent. "I've worked with companies like Polaris," she continued. "They don't win by being smarter. They win by exhausting you. By burying you under lawyers until you settle for survival." "Well," I said, "I don't settle." "Good," she said. "Because I just sent Avery a zip file that'll make Emmons choke on his non-disclosure." That afternoon, Avery forwarded me the contents. An internal slide deck labeled Post-Merrick Transition Strategy. A spreadsheet called Client Vulnerability Index, with a column titled Exploit Potential, and a memo, this one signed by Callan himself, listing legal intimidation as a soft pressure tactic. Avery's message came with a subject line that made me smile for the first time in days. "Discovery bomb locked and loaded. Just say when." They wanted to play hardball? I just found the bat. Denver wasn't just symbolic, it was personal. That's where I closed my first 7-figure contract. Where I spent Thanksgiving in a shipping yard trying to reroute damaged freight from a blizzard. Where I once pulled an all-nighter in a motel lobby just to keep a merger alive over lukewarm coffee and trust. It was the heart of Polaris's expansion model. My blueprint. My battlefield. So that's where I decided to strike. We booked a quiet, high-floor conference room in a boutique hotel near Union Station. Big windows. No distractions. Just a polished wood table and 6 people who still believed business was done handshake first. I called it the summit. Avery flew in from Anchorage. Danielle drove from Seattle. Aaron from Crown Hauling took red-eye and brought 2 regional reps with him. Louisa Tran cleared her calendar. Connor DeWitt joined via encrypted call. 6 of us. All burned. All pissed. All ready. I stood at the front of the room with a whiteboard and said just one thing. They tried to isolate us. Let's show them what happens when we link up. We spent the next 4 hours tearing apart Polaris's network, not just clients, but vendors, freight channels, regulatory partners, maintenance suppliers. Danielle had blueprints. Avery had timelines. Aaron had data from Crown that showed inflated delivery costs post-Merrick. What we realized was simple. Polaris had lost control of the one thing they couldn't buy, trust. Connor piped up over Zoom, "We don't need to fight Polaris in court. We just need to out-execute them for 2 months and let the numbers do the talking." Danielle nodded. "And when they start bleeding clients, then we file a cross-complaint. Force discovery. Show what they've been hiding." Louisa looked at me. "So what's the plan?" I drew 3 circles on the board. 1. Secure. Lock in 6 major clients. Build public-facing contracts with airtight terms and transparent pricing. Use Velocity Freight's back-end systems for fulfillment. No gray zones. 2. Reveal, leak internal Polaris documents, legally, through court filings. Show the industry that they're predatory, not just to me, but to anyone who builds real relationships. 3. Replace, start onboarding Polaris's subcontractors, drivers, yard crews, third-party compliance auditors. Not just the clients. The engine. The message, I said, isn't, "Come work with me." It's, "You don't have to work with them." By sunset, we had a 6-week plan, 3 signed letters of intent, and an offer on the table from a West Coast investment group ready to float our operating capital under one condition. Take the fight public when the moment's right. The next day, back in Anchorage, I received a certified letter at my home. Inside, a final settlement offer from Polaris. They wanted me to sign a permanent non-disparagement clause, a 5-year industry ban, and relinquish all client contact in exchange for a 6-figure payout. 6 figures. After 8 years building their empire. I held the letter for a moment, then set it on fire in the kitchen sink. That night, I sent a calendar invite titled, Q4 Partnership Announcement, Velocity Freight plus Merrick Group. The location? A co-sponsored industry dinner. Downtown Denver. Same night as Polaris's annual investor gala, 3 blocks away. The ballroom at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Denver shimmered with polished glassware, soft jazz, and the kind of people who still believed quarterly earnings was a personality trait. Polaris's investor gala was happening 3 blocks away at the Four Seasons. I didn't need to crash it. I just needed them to hear the noise from mine. At exactly 7 p.m., the doors opened. The room wasn't packed with media or startup hype. It was filled with operators, real ones. People who owned trucks, ran dispatch, controlled purchasing, managed freight. The kind of people Polaris never invited to their dinners. Velocity Freight co-sponsored the event. Avery stood near the entrance with folders of pre-cleared contracts. Danielle greeted key attendees with quiet confidence, like someone who already knew how the night would end. And me? I stood near the front, just behind the podium, watching everyone walk in. Morrison from West Range Aggregates. Natalie Brooke from SkySouth Construction. 3 buyers from Hartfield Excavation, a Polaris account, until last week. All of them were here for one reason. Because I answered their phone calls when no one else did. At 8:15, I gave the shortest speech of my life. You already know who I am. You know how I work. I'm not offering discounts or promises. I'm offering stability, honesty, and partnership. If that's worth something to you, we're open for business. Applause wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was real. Afterward, I stood at the bar sipping a beer when Avery leaned in. Polaris just called their PR firm. Investor questions are coming in. What questions? Why Velocity Freight just signed $19.2 million in regional logistics contracts in a single night. 3 days later, Polaris stock dipped 14%. 5 clients issued public exit notices. The industry press picked up Danielle's evidence through court records. The phrase, exploit potential, became a meme in logistics forums. Avery filed the counterclaim with full documentation and a press-ready version. Quiet, professional, ruthless. By the end of Q4, I had 26 signed clients, for new hires, including 2 ex-Polaris field managers, and a standing offer to join Velocity's board. I turned it down. Instead, I asked for a division, Merrick Solutions, under the Velocity umbrella. Independent, field-run, relationship first. No bureaucracy. On a snowy Tuesday in January, I drove past the Polaris office park in South Anchorage. The lights were off in the western wing. The parking lot, once overfull, was now lined with for-lease signs. I didn't slow down, didn't smile, didn't gloat, because this was never about revenge. It was about building something they couldn't destroy. As I pulled into the lot at Velocity HQ, my phone buzzed. A text from Danielle. Just got off the call. Hartfield's legal dropped the last threat. It's done. Underneath, one more message from Avery. You won. Quietly. Like a professional. I stepped out of the truck, took a breath of that sharp Alaskan air, and walked into my new office. Not the biggest, not the fanciest, but mine, built on trust, one relationship at a time.